Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for having me at this conference. I'd like to be with you in person, but sadly it's 2020 and it is what it is, so nothing we can do about it. So the title of my presentation is The Ambiguous Beautification of Dystopias, from Zamyatin's We to Brooker's Black Mirror. And I just want to propose the idea that we examine beautiful dystopias or beautified dystopias. And I'll start reading my paper for you. Before any close readings of the texts, there's one question that demands an answer. What is beauty in the context of a dystopia? What kind of beauty tends to emerge in these texts? If we go back to Kant, he understood beauty as a spontaneous aesthetic pleasure provoked by what transcends human understanding, usually the natural world. But this definition is only useful in this context as the negated term. What is dystopian beauty then? I think I'm going to approach dystopian beauty as an aesthetic experience that's self-consciously constructed and one that takes the artificial, the socio-technological world as its object of contemplative pleasure. So that's my idea. But we need to bear in mind that dystopias by definition are distorting mirrors of the worst in real societies. So how can they be beautiful? My argument is that both We and Black Mirror illustrate that, and that dystopian beauty emerges from the contemplation of a complex of social and technological elements which together point at the existence of an underlying rational order. So there's some underlying reason that you can see while you contemplate that dystopia. I was inspired by Siegfried Kracauer's idea, who, in speaking about popular spectacles, he says that they are the aesthetic reflex of the rationality to which the prevailing economic system aspires. So, in this view, the object of social critique would coincide with the object of aesthetic pleasure. Both will be, in a deeply ambivalent fashion, one and the same object. So, therefore, precisely because most often dystopias are critically hyperbolic extrapolations of contemporary technologies and societies, when they beautify themselves, they acquire a mystifying potential which enters into a dialogic tension with its critical potential. How is this ambivalence realized in textual and audiovisual practice? Can mystification outweigh critique, or can they reinforce each other? My assumption in now analyzing both We and Black Mirror is that beautified dystopias could be a powerful way of representing the deep irony of history itself. That is Walter Benjamin's idea that civilization is inseparable from barbarism. So in other words, beautified dystopia could represent the deep interrelation and the permanent dialogue between both the beauty and the ugliness of real societies, something that is made quite explicit in both the texts that we will examine now. So I'll begin with We now. Okay, so as you probably know from previous presentations, We is a Russian novel that was first published in English in 1924, and it's an essentially transnational work in its inception and its reception. It has been canonized in many histories of science fiction. According to most interpretations, the novel's ambivalence is its key feature and its strength. Jameson, for example, tells us that We is a true anti-utopia in which the utopian impulse is still at work. Then Sauvin tells us that it is an example of dialectical utopianism. And Wegener stresses the core ambivalence even further by detailing and analyzing the dystopia's utopian undercurrents. Where does this ambivalence originate? In terms of We's historical connections, Zamyatin was deeply engaged, both personally and intellectually, with two parallel social formations. On the one hand, the revolutionary aspirations and the Stalinist turn of the Soviet Union, and on the other hand, the transition towards Taylorism in the industries of the North Atlantic capitalist world. In this way, We does not represent exclusively Soviet communism or industrial capitalism. Instead, because of Zamyatin's heretical non-conformity towards both systems, the novel's object of criticism is much broader. In the terms of Frankfurt School theory, this novel seems concerned with the subsumption of increasing aspects of life into the dynamics of instrumental rationality. That is the idea that whether by states or by private corporations, everything is potentially subject to planning, supervision, and control. So, as I suggested before, we represent the profound entanglement of progress and domination, of civilization and oppression, and aesthetically, of beauty and ugliness. But my question is, how does Wee's beautification function, and why do I take it as paradigmatic? For an answer, I will chiefly focus on the narrator's aestheticizing voice and the ironies emerging from it. We is presented as a diary of brief audio recordings, and it is narrated in the first person by a character who is at first an insider, someone who fully complies with one state ideology. His name is D503 because people here have numbers rather than names. He's a mathematician in charge of building the Integral, a spaceship which shall be launched into the unknown, and it will be packed with information about life in one state. D503 tells us that the reason for writing his diary is to tell alien races how they have achieved a perfect way of life. Although, in this sense, he may seem as the caricature of a totalitarian zealot, because of his pompous claims to objective truth and perfection, he's much more than a butt of satire. As the diary advances, D503 records many haiku-like impressions of his surroundings, such as the sky, the streets, his workplace, social gatherings, and he does so in a way in which his peculiar aesthetic sensibility allows the implied reader to enjoy the exploration of this dystopian future and potentially also to partake in his fascination towards it. I will now focus on record 2, which basically lays out the main premises of D503's aesthetic sensibility and reveals the logic with which we beautifies dystopia. In this record, the narrator first looks up at the sterile sky of the future and explicitly rejects antiquated aesthetic sensibilities. He says, "What a sky, blue and sullied by a single cloud. What primitive tastes the ancient must have had if their poets were inspired by those absurd, untidy clumps of mists, idiotically jostling one another about. I love, and I am sure that I am right in saying we love, only such a sky as this one today, sterile and immaculate. On days like this, the whole world seems to have been cast of the immovable and everlasting glass of the green wall, as all of our structures." Then he recalls his morning at the Integral's construction site. At that moment, he describes he saw for the complex machinery in similarly exalted terms. He describes it as a grandiose mechanical ballet, flooded with the light of the lovely blue-eyed sun. And he says, why is this dance beautiful? Because it is a non-free movement, because all of the fundamental significance of the dance lies precisely in its ideal non-freedom. And he goes on to say that the instinct of non-freedom has been an essential part of man from time immemorial. So, in these passages, we see how the narrator provides readers with an almost cinematic experience of a hypnotizing mechanical motion and a soothing natural stillness, which on the whole appear as an ode for absolute technological domination. Aesthetic pleasure seems to stem from a beauty of unfreedom. This is could be described as a futurist-like fascination for mechanical progress, but unlike the Italian futurists, not because of technology's transformative potentials, but because of its rational predictability, its perfect functioning, and its conformity with an underlying rationality. To one state doctrine and to the narrator's sensibility, technology seems to be beautiful because it allows the complete domination of all aspects of life, to the extent of eliminating all the rationality and all the untidiness of the social and natural worlds. Here the beautiful is what allows fantasies of mathematical control, and in fact, as White tells us, mathematical symbols like the square root of -1 are constants in the whole novel. So, considering these logics of beautification, it's not hard to imagine some of the ironies that will follow. The narrator later falls in love with I-330, a rebel leader who helps him in noticing the oppressive functioning of one state, and gradually he adopts his aesthetic sensibility so as to revalue what one state devalues: nature, irrationality, and disorder. The diary shows the ongoing reversal of his thought. Little by little, he embraces a more romantic sensibility and expresses awe towards what was previously undesirable. Even though in the end, however, his imagination is surgically removed and he goes back to worshipping technology, but like a robot, without that aesthetification of everything. So, we can see, to sum up, that the reverse of the beautification of dystopia are its not so beautiful political consequences. D503's idealization of machinery is only an aesthetic reflex of how one state is embarked upon the single-minded pursuit of techno-scientific progress. It is in all these ways that I take we as paradigmatic of the beautification of dystopia, because the object of criticism coincides with the narrator's object of fascination. But this process of beautification is only constructed in order to be later deconstructed. Okay, so now what about visual dystopias? The underlying ambivalence of dystopian beauty that we saw in We is a dilemma which affects cinema more deeply, because they frequently involve the construction of spectacular mise-en-scènes, such as these, or more recently these ones. The beautification of dystopias, although it would only manifest itself to varying degrees across specific visual texts, seems intensified by dynamics inherent to filming. How would this tend to happen? First, on an obvious level, because they are visual objects, film dystopias would position themselves as the objects of contemplation. But further, because dystopian beauty emerges from the appreciation of an underlying rationality in socio-technological objects, one should remember the doubly mystifying effects of filming such objects. In this sense, we should remember that Comolli argued that machinery, which is already an idealization of the work that perfects and improves it, rendering it more regular, prompter, cleaner, straighter, is doubly idealized and eroticized when it is turned into a moving image. In other words, a mystifying quality would automatically emerge from heavily technologized dystopian mise-en-scènes. How can these dystopias be ironic then? Can they deconstruct their beautification and cause a critical effect in the same way we does? This will be my central question for examining Black Mirror. Now, I'm sure you all know about Black Mirror. It's a Channel 4 anthology show first released in 2011, then continued by Netflix from 2016. And the series has often limited itself to the introduction of minor technological novelties into a world that's basically like our own. But Black Mirror, in episodes like this one, has also immersed viewers into fully dystopian worlds. This episode, and you have a synopsis here, basically puts us in a society that's wallpapered with endless video screens. Bing, the protagonist, is profoundly dissatisfied with how everything happens, and after some misadventures, he decides to go against the machine, and he fails catastrophically in the end. So on an abstract level, this episode is like We, and like many other dystopias. It is a world of absolute technological control where freedom and individuality are almost erased. Just like in one state, the antagonist is an aimless machine, an all-encompassing apparatus of power, which ultimately defeats the main character and his rebellious actions. As Charlie Brooker puts it, the episode is an incredibly reductive, piss-taking version of capitalism. Those are his words anyway. But despite this implied critical aim, my main question here is, how is this episode's world beautified, and how does that interrelate with its critical potential? While Zamyatin beautifies We through its narrator's voice, in the case of 15 Million Merits, dystopian beauty is constructed cinematically through the combination of a mise-en-scène and camera perspectives. Co-creator Annabel Jones notes that while Bing's room is a cell, and certainly everything is a cell in this society, the design is all about seduction and beauty, and production designers did a really good job with that, as we can see in these images. Everything is perfectly measured and seems like completely comfortable. So, as she acknowledges, the tensions between social critique and technological seductiveness are taken to an extreme in this episode by constructing a dystopia that functions smoothly and comfortably for day-to-day tasks. This is a machine that cares for you in practical details like your bike seat and your visits to the toilet, but beauty that does not solely stem from technological comfort. As in D503's descriptions of machinery, the diegetic world of 15 million merits is everywhere visually pleasant for its perfectly calculated geometry, with visual patterns and symmetries that evoke harmony and order. If we consider the character's workplace, this is not just a neatly arranged futuristic gym with cozy stationary bikes. It is also a cubicle within a masterfully planned facility, one of which viewers are given brief but awe-inspiring glimpses. It appears that we are in a regularly geometric building that stretches infinitely beyond the image's vanishing lines, and as such, this machine can easily invoke fear for its humongous scale. But can we separate fear from awe? After all, because of the techno-scientific rationality behind this world's design, its image makes us partake in a feeling of mastery and control. It seems to suggest that, despite the evident injustices of this dystopia, at least its rules are rationally graspable and its mechanisms manageable and efficient, in a sense. It is quite telling to remember how Charlie Brooker describes how he had the idea for the episode. He says that he was sitting on the sofa with his wife Connie, watching TV with a laptop, a phone, a television, and his wife told him, literally, you'd be happy if you were in a box and the walls were all screens. And he says, yes, I'd be happy there. So this episode's design seems to follow his impression. It seems to play with two opposing forces. On the one hand, a critical awareness of our excessive use of technology, and on the other hand, an indulgence of the pleasures provided by those same technologies. Does aesthetic enjoyment prevail over critical potentials? The episode, with its resolution, seems to hint that criticism is pointless and that embracing the system's pleasures is the only option. But is this ending ironic? Is it intended for a critical effect? Or does it really want to imply that the allure of dystopian technologies is inescapable? I would argue that we don't really know. Black Mirror does not provide a clear answer, but seems to deepen the ambivalence of beautifying dystopia. Now, to conclude, my argument throughout this presentation is essentially that the beautification of dystopias is a source of deep ideological tensions and potentially a way of representing society in a dialectical manner, as we saw in works like We and Black Mirror, which appear to self-consciously underscore their own contradictions. In these cases and others, the ambivalence of dystopian beautification seems to be a phenomenon that deserves further analysis and deeper theorization. As I noted before, beautified dystopias seem capable of self-consciously thematizing Walter Benjamin's maxim that there is no document of civilization which is not at the same time a document of barbarism. In other words, that there is no beauty without some underlying horror. Thank you very much.